in your country last weekend. So I'm going to carry on talking about cameras and lighting. Please do ask me any questions. I have a little box down here on my screen, which I can hopefully see any questions that you may email me. So please do email me any questions and I'll try and answer them the best I possibly can. So this is the first one of these I've done, so excuse me if I do feel a little bit hesitant. But this is a problem we have today, is that there are so many cameras are now available to buy, and every week a new camera comes on the market. So if you want to buy a camera, what camera is best to buy? Well, of course, it all depends what you're going to do with it. Are you going to be making a movie? Are you going to be making a documentary? Or are you just going to be doing things, say, for a YouTube channel? Now, with the great advance in camera technology and the great popularity on 2/3-inch chip cameras, I'm sorry, S35mm chip cameras. Now, if I can just I can't. I want to write S35 down here, but it's a little bit difficult to write just using a mouse. It's not very good. So S35 chip camera. So there's all these cameras around at the moment. But of course, people often say, well, if I buy a really good camera, I will get great pictures. But of course, the camera does not make the pictures. You, as the artist, creates pictures. So you, as the artist, should really think and study about art and what you want to produce in your pictures. And it's a great idea to actually to study some of the great artists of the world to see how they have created and painted their pictures and how they've used composition in their pictures. This is an example I use a lot in my workshops. It was done by a very famous English artist. But you can see in this picture how the artist has just used a single light source in the middle, a single light source, just here, light the people around the table. It's a very effective composition. The people are in a nice composed circle, and it's a very simple light source. So it doesn't always have to be very complicated to be incredibly effective. Though if you are lighting this particular scene, you might have to be careful how you light it because there's a moon to the window here, so there's two light sources. So in order to get the balance between the moon and the light here, you have to be a bit careful with how you actually control your lighting, because indeed, lighting is all about light control. Another very famous painting here, we can learn a lot, is a well-known English artist called Gainsborough, and he has nicely positioned his characters to the left of the frame. So it's a very nice, in fact it's widescreen, a very nice, well-composed picture. So you really have to think about how you're going to compose your picture. So it's more than just buying the right camera, but also composing your picture. Another famous painting. So you see how he positioned his artists, how he's lit them. It's soft light. They're in front of some trees. There's a nice dog by their feet. So it's a very nicely composed picture. So really think about how you're going to compose your pictures. But also, don't always just think that when you do your compositions and you create your art, that your viewers will actually understand what you are actually framing and what your composition actually is. How you see your picture may not be the same way as the viewers see their pictures. This is a very famous painting by an artist called Van Gogh. He was one of the modernist artists in the early 19th century. He painted pictures very quickly. Now, if you look at this painting, you will see a road, you will see some corn, a cornfield, some birds, and a heavy purple sky. So you may wonder what is actually going on in this picture. But if I told you this was the last picture he painted, and 2 days later, he blew his brains out. You may then see this picture differently, that he was actually a depressive, and and you can see he may be trying to say it was the end of his life, the sky, the dark, life is ending, the birds are flying away. So he may be trying to say some other things which you may not realize, first of all. Because your viewers may well be sat at home. This was my lounge before we decorated it. And your viewers will be surrounded by other visual input, photographs of the children, photographs of their auntie, other things around them. In fact, now it's very common for people to be two having their laptop and their phone and their television all going on at the same time. So how people see your images cannot be the same way as you think people are seeing your images. So let's consider that how you compose things and how you frame things may not be quite the right message to the person who is viewing your images. But going back to cameras then, I mean, we can talk about how the visual imagery, how we see it for 3 or 4 years. It's a very complicated and interesting subject, how we perceive visual images. You can almost describe it as if you smell things, you may suddenly feel hungry. So how you see images will affect the way you see them. Well, as a camera person, the most important part of the whole camera exercise is in fact the lens. Because the lens is here, and the image that is created here at the CCD, at the block, is the best the image will become. Because here is the image produced by the lens, and it goes through the post-production, the editing, to eventually distribution on a TV screen. And the image that appears here will not be any better than the image appears here that the lens has produced on the CCD here. So really the lens is probably the most important part of the whole camera production chain. You can edit it, you can change it, you can do all sorts of things with it, but if it's soft here, it'll be even softer and more out of focus down here. So really the lens to a camera person is probably the most important part of the whole program making exercise. But this is where the whole industry gets very interested. Here we have a red camera, which came out a few years ago at really a very competitive price. But if you then put on it a film lens, a really good quality lens, it produces really good images. Consider a football camera or an outside broadcast event. Here we have a lens which will cost you probably around $80,000. So this lens is a very long zoom range, it's very fast, it collects a lot of light, it works at a very big f-stop, but it's a very expensive lens. So as a person who may be buying a camera or buying a lens, you think, well, what is going on? What is complicated? Why is it so complicated? And this is a standard television lens, one I'm using later on today. It costs you around about £7,000. But then, of course, you can buy a whole camera, like an EX3, for the same as this lens. So it's a question of really diminishing returns. The more you spend on your camera and your lens, the better the pictures that will be produced. So it's no point really in trying to get a cheap lens because it will only produce poor quality images. One of the major problems with cheap lenses is this thing called chromatic aberration. Because if you have a single lens here and you have light coming in, the focus point of blue light and red light actually in different places. This is referred to as chromatic aberration. And one of the harder things for lens designers and manufacturers to overcome is this fact of chromatic aberration. Now you may have seen this, particularly in a cheap lens. If you have an out of focus image, around that out of focus image, you often get green and blue fringing. This is the mark of a poor quality lens, and the fact that the blue light and the red light focuses at different points. So a good lens is very worth while getting. In fact, lenses have an awful lot of different issues which manufacturers have to overcome. And the higher the quality of the pictures you want, like 4K, the better the lens has to be to overcome all these different um, problems that lenses have. I want to go on now and just talk a bit more about exposure. Oh no, sorry. This is actually what we mean by depth of focus. Depth of focus is the focus behind the lens, it, where depth of field is in front of the lens. If you remember the old-fashioned cameras with the man with the black hood over his head, he was altering the plate at the back. He was altering the depth of focus to get the image into focus, whereas depth of field is in front of the lens. So exposure. Well, exposure is how we use the camera and have a latitude between the blackest part of the picture and the whitest part of the picture. So that is what we mean by exposure, how we expose between those 2 points, the whitest part and the blackest part. But how do we judge when our camera is correctly exposed? And here's this mug on a white background at one exposure. Here's another picture of the same mug at different exposure, and another photograph at a different exposure. So there's 3 exposures there. Now, how do we judge which one of those exposures is actually correct? Let's go on and consider then the latitude of the camera. Here we have a photograph of a building and an archway. This was taken actually with auto exposure. And we just go on to the next slide. And if over here you see we've got an aperture of f5.6, and this is the whitest part of the picture, and just there is the blackest part of the picture. So this is our latitude of our camera. Our camera can only cope with that black bit and this white bit. So if we then go on to our next slide, and we just go on bit, and here we now have aperture of f8. So now we have the blackest part of the picture and the whitest part of the picture. And that is, this line here indicates our latitude that our camera has, handles in our blackest part and the whitest part. So when we judge exposure, we're actually moving our latitude around until we get the correct look we want by using the latitude of the camera. I'm going to go back actually to the previous slide. So you see f6 is that, and that's the whitest part and the blackest part. The next part at f8, that's the blackest part, that's the whitest part. So that is the latitude of our camera. So we have to think how we use latitude of our camera. And if we then go on to our open up even more, you see now latitude of our camera can't cope. All this is now overexposed or burnt out, as we say, and this bit up here is now almost correctly exposed because the latitude of our camera can only cope with this light spot up here. It can't cope with extreme levels, extreme difference of exposure between up here and down here. So it's important that when you start, you actually set up your viewfinder correctly. And I advise you to, when you first start, is to select color bars. Now these color bars may be in the menu function, they may be a switch on top of the camera. It really depends exactly what sort of camera you have. So if you select color bar in your viewfinder, and with the brightness control, you adjust the brightness, and so you can just about see this black bar here, which is plus 2% above black level. So with your brightness, just adjust the viewfinder, so you can just see this black bar, which is 2% above black level. And then with contrast, turn this up so the white will not get any brighter in your viewfinder by the contrast. Now, if you haven't got color bars to your camera, what is a very good idea is to get a nice photograph of your children or your auntie or some nice picture. Put that in front of your camera Adjust your camera the best you can, and then have a look in the viewfinder and make sure that the picture in the viewfinder matches the photograph. So the color, the contrast, everything in your picture is recreated in your viewfinder. That's a very good way of checking your viewfinder is set up correctly. Because if your viewfinder is not set up correctly, you will be, or exposure, how you see exposure will be incorrect. You may underexpose or overexpose, depending on how your viewfinder has been set up or incorrectly set up. So it's very important, especially if you're hiring a camera, to make sure this is correct because you do not know who's used the camera before you. If you buy a camera, then you set this up from day one, you may find it's correct all the time. So setting up your viewfinder is really key before you start doing any filming, or indeed your monitor or anything else you want to use. Now I'm going to go on about how we actually create our actual pictures. Now every camera has a CCD, maybe your phone or whatever camera is. So light in gives you volts out. This is a CCD, a charge coupled device. It gives you volts in and volts out. And if you look at it on a graph, there's the brightness of light in, and then this is a straight line here that gives you difference between light in and volts out. And this area, this line here, is referred to as gamma. So light in gives you volts out, and it only goes up to 1 volt. And it's important that you realise that the whole video system is compressed within that system. But normally we have a different sort of gamma as opposed to a straight line gamma, sort of an S-shaped gamma like this, which is light in and volts out. By having this S-shaped gamma, you can see now that you can get much more light in before you reach 1 volt, which then becomes overexposed and burnt out. So this is how we get from light in to volts out, which then creates our TV picture. This is quite interesting because Abel's got this effect called zebra. Lots of cameras have got a zebra setting, and normally the default zebra setting is 70%. So on a sort of pale person like myself, if you put zebra on and you want to expose me correctly, you'll get a bit of zebra on my forehead, on the top of my nose, on the small shiny highlights. That would be zebraing. So zebra is actually a very useful exposure indicator. Remember that this is not going to go onto the recording. This is a purely in viewfinder setting with the zebra, which is normally set at 70%. Be aware that this can also be changed in the menu settings on some cameras. So if you're hiring a camera, make sure that the zebra, you know where the zebra setting is at 70%. Some people like it to have it 100%, but me personally, I find that much too high. So that is how zebra can actually be a great exposure. But don't have it on all the time. Now this is a workshop manual from Panasonic, and here you see they're talking about zebra gamma. Up here on the book of words, there is a gamma setting. So if to do some shooting, it might be quite a good idea to go into the menu and change the gamma settings to see what the changes in the pictures are. But do this before you start shooting. Don't do this a minute or so before you're shooting. Try this out beforehand. Now, Panasonic call this cine gammas, and so that was Panasonic. That was Sony. This is Panasonic, and they call it film-like, cine-like gamma. So lots of cameras come with preset gammas, and it can be very helpful if you want to have a wider contrast range, or wider latitude of your camera. Down here, they actually do show you the picture of different gammas. So this is why I want to mention gammas, because they can make the look of your picture quite different, and it's a good idea you change or have a look if you've got gammas in your menu settings to try different gammas. Now here we have, I'm going to get a bit technical now, but here we have what's called a grayscale, the blackest part of the picture and the whitest part of the picture. And if we look at that on a display device, that lineup chart as referred to, you will see here we have all we've got to play with in our video system. We've got 1 volt. This is 1 volt, that is 0.7 volt, which is our black level, and this is 0 volts down here. And this bit underneath here is quite important because it tells our television or our monitor where each picture starts and stops. So if we don't, if the TV device or the viewing device doesn't know where each frame starts and stops, it's crazy. So the bit down here is a bit that tells the television where each picture starts and stops, which is what this 0.3 of a volt is all about. So our actual only video picture is between this 0.7 volt, between this gap here, which is why we have all these different gammas and things to try and get all our information really in between 0.7 of a volt. Okay, I'm sorry about that, but I have a bit of internet issue here, so I hope you can all. No, I'm back again. I'm here. I'll just get. Yes, we can see. Okay, good. Um, I'm in central London. For some reason, the internet in the middle of capital city is a bit iffy. So anyway, there we are. That's what I'm talking about. This is our um, our waveform monitor, which you can see the issues we have with our video signal between 1 volt and the 1 volt and 0.7 volt. Just so you understand the issues of how our video signal is. I just want to remind ourselves about what we mean by f-stops. F2.8 on the lens is a big hole, like this, and F16 on the lens is a small hole. And remember, every change in f-stops between f-stops, say F16 and F11, you are halving or doubling the light. So if you go from F16 to F11, you're halving the light. If you go from F11 to F8, you're halving light again. Or if you go from F8 to F11, you're doubling the light. So each change in a whole f-stop, you're actually doubling or halving the light, depending on on which way you're turning the iris. So it's quite important to understand. You all know what we mean by f-stops and how F16 or F22 is a small hole on the iris, and F2.8 or 3.5 is a big hole on the iris. Which is important to understand this because um, exposure can have a big difference in depth of field. Now in this photograph, the camera was focused on the tulip and it was on F16. And notice how the background is almost in focus. All we did now was just change the exposure to F2.8, and you can now see how the background has gone really out of focus. So f-stops have a big change on the depth field, and this is why in the world of movie making, in the world of people who want to make film-like films, they all want to work at f2.8 or that sort of f number to get this lovely shallow depth of field, which we all consider to be very filmic. So filmic is f2.8, and also by having a larger format size camera, like an S35 type chip in it. It will again will help the depth of field or reduce depth of field and get much more of this filmic look. So for the filmic look, which lots of people are trying to get, they want a large format size camera, like a one with S35 type chip in it, like a Canon or um, camera with a large format chip in it. And you want to work at a large f number, like f2.8, and you want to work on a fairly tightish lens, also to reduce that depth of field. So to make your filmic look, you want to work at a big f number, f2.8, or a big IRA size, f2.8. You want a large format size, like a S25 camera, like um, um, a Canon C300 or C500, and you want to have a longer focal length lens to give you the shallow depth of field. So they're the three things which affect depth of field: focal length, aperture, format size, and of course also distance. Now, there's a lot of debate and talk in the press about 4K or UHD, as referred to. In fact, some of you may already have a 4K TV at home, or often referred to as UHD. So this really how the whole world now suddenly has become 4K UHD. Um, but let's just look at the amount of data involved in a 4K, excuse me, in a 4K distribution. This is represents all the information you need to record 4K. This information you want in 2K, 1080p, 720p, and you see the DVDs really right down here. So you can see the huge amount of the data you need to work in 4K. And this is really the problem at the moment, because to get 4K into people's homes is a problem, and at the moment there does not appear to be a standard distribution method of distributing 4K. So if you're shooting on 4K, you have to be very much aware of all the extra data that you're going to be using. And before you even start shooting on 4K, make sure that your editing system and all your post-production systems can cope with 4K. Because as you can see here, you have 4 times as much data than you have with normal HD. So be aware of that. And now there are lots of things coming out in the market which are 4K capable, but do check that your whole post-production system from beginning to end is actually will work in 4K. Lots of people say that they're shooting in 4K to make it future-proof, because if their program may want to be used or shown in some years hence, they may require the format to be in 4K. But as a sort of a little bit of a side to that, really, in the UK here, we have a program that is shown Saturday evenings on BBC Two, one of the main terrestrial broadcasters. The program itself was made 30 years ago in standard definition, and yet it's still one of the most popular programs on television, even though it's 30 years old. It's a comedy program, and it is shot in SD. So the idea of everything has to be in 4K for future-proofing it is an argument maybe you can actually perhaps argue against, or at least discuss and think about. But 4K is a lot of data. The file sizes are enormous. There's 8.6 million pixels in a frame. And that 16-bit color depth, which we're not going to talk about today, that means 1.7 terabyte an hour. And that's huge. And the person who recently shot the film The Hobbit, I don't know if anybody saw the film The Hobbit, but the final online master, which was shot at 48 frames per second in 3D, and it was actually required 2.2 gigabytes a second of data. And this is 2 times faster than the fully loaded RAID drive. So, it really is an awful lot of data if you're going to shoot 4K, especially in 3D. Now, the guy who was the used to be very much with HBO, which is that big American box office channel. He put forward this argument that is you and I would barely notice the difference between 4K and existing 2K on sets around 60 to 70 inches in size. So the argument is, will we, the consumers, really notice difference if we shoot on 4K? And in the cinema, if you go to the cinema, you have to sit in the first 6 rows of the theatre to see the difference between HD and 4K. So the argument of shooting in 4K is somewhat interesting. I'm not going to say with time, but certainly there is a big move now. In fact, I myself have shot on 4K. But it's interesting whether we should all rush ahead and start shooting things in 4K. Because we perceive edge sharpness as contrast between the edge and what's behind it. In other words, when we see sharpness, it's the contrast between objects we see as sharpness. But if you want better resolution, maybe the argument is to shoot at a higher frame rate and not just more pixels. And we can achieve this already with existing HD. If you shoot in 48p instead of 24p, you simply create a very high resolution image with a lot of image motion blur. So, it's a whole argument about shooting in 4K. And then, of course, we have the cost. The lenses are, special 4K lenses. This is an advert from Fujinon. They have to be twice as good as HD lenses because we've got twice as many information. So the whole exercise of shooting in 4K becomes even more complicated. I've already mentioned the film look and how a lot of us now want to make our program with the film look. They want it to have a shallow depth of field like this very old photograph. No very shallow depth of field. But consider this for a moment. If you want to go and make your programs in using large format camera and make your films with very much a cinematographic look, that film look, consider this. This was a painting, very famous painting, recently sold for £44 million. This was another painting sold by £47 million. Another painting sold for £49 million. Now, nobody said to the artists, oh dear, it all looks sharp, the background's all in focus, so I'm going to pay £49 million to you, Mr. Renoir, because it doesn't look like a film. So it's interesting how people pay a lot of money for an artist in which everything is in focus as opposed to that film look. So before we all rush ahead and think, we must make our program with a film look, let's consider these artists. Now in Europe, we often have people ask, what was the best film ever made in your opinion? One of the best films that people often say was the best film ever made was this film by Orson Welles, Citizen Kane. Very stylized film, and I suggest if none of you have watched this film, Citizen Kane, by Orson Welles, made in 1950s, you actually go and watch it. It's black and white, but it was very famous for what is called deep focus. They spent an awful lot of time in getting everything in focus. And there's some wonderful imagery in it where everything in it is sharp. The lady in the foreground here is in focus, and the man in the background is in focus. Now, if you're using this on a normal film-like camera, this wouldn't be possible. Either you'd have to focus on the lady or focus on the man. There wouldn't be enough depth of field to have both of these people in focus. So shooting in the shallow depth of field may not be what you want. There are lots of other examples of films which are renowned for what is referred to as deep focus. So I just want to quickly go through, in the UK, what are some of the most popular cameras around. There's the HDV, recently designed um, some years ago, quite a popular camera. Now this is number one in Europe for the most popular hire camera, the Canon C300. It's, it has a 35mm sensor size and records at 50 megabits, and the daily rate is £1 is £137 a day. Number two in the hire charts is this camera PXW F7. The F7 has become a very popular camera. The hire rate in the United Kingdom is only £160 a day. Again, it's 35mm sensor size. Get that film look, which is what people seem to be wanting to get their film to look, get their program to look like film. This is one of the most popular cameras. Lots of films, James Bond, and all these lots of now blockbuster movies are now shot on this particular camera. Um, and it's something more expensive. It's say £310 as a higher rate, but it's a very popular camera and it's been used a lot for wildlife documentaries and filming because it shoots up 200 frames per second, so you get those lovely slow-mo of animals doing things. This is the other camera, which is similar to the previous one. Um, James Bond and things made on this camera. Number 4, and look, it's got full slots of latitude, so it's really a very popular camera. This is number 4. Second, this is a sort of a newsy type camera. It's only got a 2/3" sensor, so it's a standard TV type camera, and it's number 4 on the higher charts. Number 6 is this camera, another Sony one, PMW F55, very popular camera. Again, has a super 35mm sensor, so it gives you those lovely filmic look. Red is another very popular camera, number 7 in our high charts in the UK. Again, it gives you that filmic look. It's number 7 in the high charts. Number 8 is the F5, another very popular camera from Sony. Number 9 is the Canon XF305. So this is one of the small, lightweight cameras, great for documentaries, those sort of very small situations where you just want to be visible. Very lightweight camera, only has a 1/3" sensor, so it's not going to give you that filmic look. And this is number 9 in the UK high charts. 10 is again Alexia Exa Mini. Again, this has a 35mm sensor and it's good for 3D and small camera work. So that's what where we are in the UK in terms of higher rate on higher camera. And this, of course, is the one that Sony brought out, the F55, which is apparently the bee's knees of cameras, and it's better than 35mm film, but it hasn't really got on very well in the higher charts. And now, of course, Bolex brought out this D16 retro camera, which has the same form size as 16mm film. So it's interesting how the whole market is moving with those. But S35 type cameras, and then with Bolex bring out this retro-looking camera with only an image size similar to 16mm film. So these are the cameras which are recommended for entertainment type programs, C300 or the F55, two very popular cameras for entertainment genres. For documentary, the Red or this Sony XW X200. And this is a little while ago, but it's it's how the cameras are complicated. So that gives you, I hope, some indication of in Europe what cameras tend to be popular, what cameras are being used, and maybe it will guide you in helping you to decide what cameras you're going to use when you admit your phone or even buy your cameras, which ways you're going to go. Don't forget, do email me some questions if you have any questions you'd like me to answer. I'll finish in a little while just to finish. Now, I just want to finish off really because it's 1846, we're getting on. I just want to go over with you what this means, because we see adverts for recorders and things, and often it refers to as 444. Lots of things are 44442, or you see this thing on adverts for recording devices. What does this actually mean, and should I actually be concerned about it, or what does it mean? So, just briefly, want to make 444 mean. Consider this picture. Now, we as humans see green very brightly. Green to our eyes is one of the brightest colour that we see. In fact, our eyes have got rods and cones in them. Rods see black and white, and cones see in colour. Now, the rods which see black and white are much more sensitive, and in fact, we have more of them than the cone we have in our eyes, which is why when the light fades, we only see in black and white at night, because our black and white receptors are much more sensitive than our colour receptors. But if we look at this picture here, and if we remove green from it, you see in terms of brightness, there is actually very little difference in terms of brightness between green and just black and white. Green and black and white. So we can say in a way that green equals black and white to our eyes. And what we're talking about is when we're recording our images is to save space. We're trying to get a lot of information into a very small pot. So we want to compress our information as much as possible. So the way this has started off, by we say that green is the same as luminance, that is black and white. So we say that our black and white picture, and we're just going to go back to it, that one is the same as green, which is the previous one. So if we then say that green and black and white is the same, we call that luminance Y. And if we then subtract the red information from that amount and the blue information from that amount, we have Y, R minus Y, and B minus Y. So we can then sample it. For every samples of Y, we have 2 samples of B minus Y and 2 samples of R minus Y, which gives us 422 samples. That's what we mean by sampling. So if you have 422, or some maybe 420 or 410, you can see what this means. Why it's a sample YR, YB, YR, YB is 422. Hope that is all. Oh wait, I've got a couple of questions here. That's going to finish off. Then I'll answer to answer some of your questions, which I'll see on the email. So I just want to briefly finish off by what I mean by interlaced and P. Now, with our pictures, we have 25 frames per second, and which is the 25th of a second, and and that is made up of 2 fields, an odd field and an even field. And so we have odd lines and even lines. So if we have a fast-moving object, let's say, it must be quite quick because I see time getting on. That is how it is seen. So a fast-moving object would appear to be blurred. And you see that on some menus in the camera, we actually got shutter angles and shutter speed, because they want to make their cameras feel like film cameras. I'm just looking at some of your emails. So in the old-fashioned way of film, you had a shutter here which went round, and the film was pulled down each time. So if you had a fast-moving man running here at 24 frames per second, which was 148th of a second shutter speed, a shutter angle of 180, as you see there, you would see him in A. The shutter was closed in B, the film was pulled down, so you would see him in C, but you wouldn't see him in B. So the problem with having P mode is you get this thing called judder. You see him in A, you see him in C, but not in B, so your brain can't work out what's going on. So we get this effect called judder because we are working in a P mode. So you see that was happening there. We don't see him in B, we only see him in A and C. Let's go on quickly. Now you see an old-fashioned projector. The film was, each frame was projected 3 times in order to reduce flicker. So I'm going to finish off here because I want to ask some of these questions. So this is the problem you have to be careful with when you're shooting in the P mode. If you're shooting at a 50th of a second, 25 frames per second, 25 frames per second in P mode, in Europe and in Doha, you are 5 frames per second. In America, you're on 30 frames. So you have 50th of a second shutter speed, which is the normal default shutter speed. So the shutter is closed for half of the time that the shutter, that for half every frame. But 25 frames, 50 seconds, they don't see the whole frame. So a fast moving object would be quite blurred because you have quite a slow shutter speed of the 50th of a second. So when you play it back, that's blurred and that's blurred, so the effect of judder is greatly reduced. Whereas if you had a much faster shutter speed, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back. A fast shutter speed, the shutter would be closed for a lot shorter the time, so the effect of judder would be increased. So what I'm saying to you is that be aware of, in P mode, to have a slow shutter speed, because if you have a fast shutter speed, the effect of judder will be greatly enhanced. I'm not going to leave it there I'm not going to leave it there now and answer some of these questions. Now I've asked here, but what camera do you prefer best for beginners? Well, the best camera for beginners is really this person said a DSLR. Well, a DSLR camera like a Canon D5, D70 is actually very good for beginners. But remember that a camera like a DSLR is really a bit of both. It's a stills camera and it's a video camera. So even though it's quite a good starting point, there are issues in using a digital stills camera or a video camera. Sound could be a problem, the viewfinder could be a problem, and actually handling it could be a problem. So DSLR is a good start for beginners, but as long as you're aware um, of the limitations of the camera, do try and keep it simple. If you're beginning, keep it simple and don't try and do anything too complicated. Don't try and do really complicated moves to start off with. Keep everything nice and simple and just really think about what you're going to do. And do think about framing, do think about edit points, and do think about audio. Audio is one thing which is frequently forgotten about at the beginners, and sound is just as important as pictures. So do think about pictures. Can you tell me, please, when answered, because I have to leave. This is my normally murder. Oh, I see. Okay. Let me just go scroll up here a minute. Which camera do you think is yeah, that's right. Somebody said that a DSLR camera is good generally, but not necessarily for video. So if you're going to do a video camera, I suggest you go and get something like a Sony EX3, EX5, one of those sort of or Canon camera, something that is really designed for video usage. A camera that can be either for video usage, it makes life very difficult. You really do need, in my mind, in my view, a camera that's either a still camera or a camera that's either a video camera. And the camera that can be either, I think, is not the best way forward. So, yes, generally not for video. Yes, I mean, this friend here said yes, it's not actually a good idea to use one of those for video. So, that is my view. But also remembering that a good lens is what you really need. Now, I've got another couple of minutes. I'll definitely move on now to a bit more lighting. Remember that the further away you get from the light, from an object, a light source, the dimmer it becomes. And this is referred to as the inverse square law. So just thinking about this. So in lighting, we talk about a candela. A candela is a standard unit um, of, of light sources, and 1 meter away from this light source is 1 lux. And if that same distance again, you see that the light has become 4 times as weak. So this is what's referred to as the inverse square law. So it's quite important that, this is obviously very obvious to me, to most of you, that the further away from the light source you become, the dimmer it becomes. But this is the effect of the inverse square law. And in Europe, we now have unit of lux, which is measurement of illumination lux. And I often work, and I'm working a TV show, I often would light to around 300 lux for my subject within the TV show. Well, I've come to the time. It's almost 1900 in the UK. I think it's 8 o'clock in your part of the world. I'm sure it's very hot. So are there any more questions you like to ask me? If you have any questions post this webinar, please do email me. Our friends at N2 do have my contact details, so you can contact our friends at N2 and they can forward your emails to me. And I see I've got an email here. Um, I'll try and get back to this person if I keep your email address and answer them. Oh, wait a minute. I've got some more emails here. Um, yes, I'm leaving. Okay. Um, yes, okay, I'm leaving. So I hope you found that interesting. It may be slightly too quick or too complicated, um, and I hope I've cleared some of the confusion. Remember, depth of field is affected by format size, which of course, once you bought the camera, it's the same format size. Depth of field is affected by exposure, the f number, the focal length of the lens, and the distance from the object. They're the 3 things which affect your depth of field. Consider if you're shooting in P mode, which most people do these days, keep it at a 50th of a second, unless you really have to change to a higher frame rate, because you're going to get judder, this judder effect. And be aware of any fast moves if you're shooting in P mode, because if you're shooting in P mode and you're going to have lots of fast moves, you're going to get the effect of judder will be much more noticeable and comfortable. What else have I covered? I'm not sure I covered. Well, hopefully you all found that very interesting. I hope I didn't speak too quickly, because I know English is not your first language. And but they do email me any other questions you want me to email you, because I'm very happy to take email questions in a later date. I'm not quite sure how I finish now. I just say goodbye to you, I turn it all off, or what. But anyway, I hope you all found that brief hour-long webinar helpful. But do they keep in touch, and I will try and help you later on. I'll say this to all my students, all my students, that I say do keep in touch and do ask me any future questions. So I think that's it. I haven't got any more questions. Somebody said thank you very much, Graham. So thank you. So do keep in touch, and I hope to talk to you again soon or hear from you electronically. So thank you very much. I'm just going to say thank you very much to you all now by email.